Good morning. Welcome to the program. Today is Friday, May 29th, 2020. So a lot of things took place overnight, and I'm going to try and provide some context to what a lot of us saw transpire before our very eyes. First, this morning, there was a CNN news reporter that was taken into custody in Minneapolis while he was just covering what was happening. I'm sure all of you know by now that the third precinct police station was, let me be clear about this, it was abandoned by the Minneapolis Police Department. And the way that barricades were set up to protect the third precinct, it was poor strategic planning of those barriers because when the protesters broke through, because the previous night, that would have been Wednesday night, police that were in the third precinct in Minneapolis were holed up. They didn't leave. They stayed in the building because the protesters had the building surrounded. So you have to think that these things are going to escalate, and they very well may continue to escalate until there are charges brought, or at least an arrest. Because you can hold somebody in the United States, you can hold somebody for 72 hours, even with scant evidence, and you can hold them, arrest them, detain them for 72 hours while you consider evidence and find evidence to charge them. And so, because that did not happen, and the district attorney for Hennepin County did no one any favors by saying, oh, we have other evidence that doesn't allow us to make an arrest, well, that was dumb. And so, if you rewind to the night before, where protesters had the third precinct surrounded, like they're warning that police station. They set barricades up in a poor fashion, and so when the barricades were breached, then those protesters had immediate and direct access to the police station, and they started the entrance on fire. And to the best of my knowledge, at least as recently as 7 a.m. Central Standard Time, that police station was still on fire. There is essentially nothing left of that building. But here's a reality I want to put on this scenario. And there's a lot of emotions flying around, and there's a lot of different things to consider. And is it right? Is it wrong? And why are you burning down your police stations? And why are you tearing up your neighborhoods? I don't entertain those conversations very much anymore because some people they're not going to get it. And we can't make them get it. We can't make them understand with conversation, with trying to share perspectives. We can't, post a bunch of articles on social media of the history of oppression in this nation. That some people are just not going to get it. And you can't waste your time on the individuals that will never be able to understand. Blue Lives Matter. You guys remember them? So usually, when an African American child, man or woman, is killed at the hands of the police, you guys know that this is a very consistent thing. And maybe in the last, I'm going to go as far as the last 10 years, even though it hasn't been that long. A lot of the incidents that African Americans have been talking about weren't recorded, now in the last decade or so, with the prevalence of cell phones and cell phone cameras. A lot of these things that we have been talking about and yelling and screaming and complaining about and being very peaceful when black children are killed, when black women are killed, when black men are killed, unarmed and defenseless. But see, because African Americans have been made to be not credible when we talk about our repression, because white people never want to feel guilty. They never want to make it their fault. They never want to see themselves as participatory with their silence. And so they don't discuss it, and therefore they want to brush it off. Sometimes you get to a point where you can no longer brush it off. What we witnessed with George Floyd was, first, it was torture. They tortured him. There's another angle of the video that I'm traumatized for the rest of my life. There is no way you can be a human being and not feel some kind of emotion watching four police officers who have tarnished their badges forever. There is no way, if you're a human being, you have to be like a sociopath to not be deeply, deeply troubled, affected, saddened, and depressed by what you saw. And they continue to show it constantly, doing more damage to people. So when we have that kind of clear evidence and they still won't make an arrest, people just are fed up. Am I getting a phone call? I'm not going to answer that. Phone line is open, by the way, 414-395-0484. It's only because African Americans have been made to feel as if we are second class citizens and what we say about our treatment doesn't matter. Sometimes there's no other recourse, and I know you don't want to hear that. But back to what I was attempting to say earlier. Blue Lives Matter didn't protect the police station. Because when they have a black child, black woman, black man that's killed, handcuffed and defenseless, back of a squad car, running away from the police, posing no threat to themselves, no threat to the police, and no threat to the public, sometimes African Americans are killed, and we have all the evidence in the world, and then we see a broken criminal justice system play out. But then whenever you have people that say, you know what, we're going to be peaceful, we're going to protest, we want to really highlight these realities, because when we talk about these situations as black people trying to engage our white friends, our white colleagues, our white allies, because it didn't happen to them and it will never happen to them, or it's so incredibly rare if it happens to them where they get assaulted by the police, but when they get assaulted by the police, they sue the whole department and they win a judgment. We can't even get an arrest. But Blue Lives Matter, that's when they surface, right? We're going to protect the police because we love the police, and fair enough. And most of the time, the police do really good things. The problem is, well, one of the many problems is that when one of their colleagues does something egregious, the good officer stays silent. And we know silence is complacency. But all of the strength that you think the right has, the far right political spectrum, the pro Trump political spectrum, and now the line has been drawn in the sand to where this is a civil war we are in the United States, and the Trump people and the Blue Lives Matter people, they are the Confederacy. And the parallels to the Civil War here are just uncanny. The first shots fired in the Civil War was the Battle of Fort Sumter. Confederates got that one. But then the Union in 1862 captures Fort Henry. That was the 3rd District Police Station. I would call this a win for the Union. And you know that even in the Revolutionary War, the first casualty, the first person killed, the first man killed in the Revolutionary War was Crispus Attucks, a black man who was unarmed. It seems that whoever fires the first shot in the Civil War, the Confederate Army fires the first shot. If you fire the first shot on American ideals, morals, and high standing principles, you're going to lose the war. The modern American Confederacy, and don't pretend like it doesn't exist because you've seen it, and they've rallied behind Trump, and now Trump is on Twitter saying, oh, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Your American president has basically called himself and named himself Jefferson Davis. He is the head of the Confederacy. And if you see it any other way, you're just pretending or you're denying, and you're going to let American history repeat itself. If American history does, in fact, repeat itself, this does not end well for the Confederacy. This script has already been written. Do you know what people are fighting for? They're fighting for justice for you. Good morning, Mary. Good morning, Teresa. Good morning, Monica. Aunt. Good morning to you as well. Don't think that when America digests all of this and there will be fundamental changes, we're also in a period of transition. Oh, there's a pandemic going on too, if that matters to anybody. Everything is changing, normals are changing, how we operate is changing, business is changing. Everything is different now. Public health is changing. And because we're in this unprecedented time, because we don't have a playbook for the pandemic side of things. And so everything is anew. We're forging new paths in how we do literally everything. If you look at your life right now, and then compare it to how your life was, say, New Year's Day. We were all optimistic about the start of a new year. Remember New Year's? It seems like it was 10 years ago. Everything is different now. And when you get to this point, when the rules get to be rewritten or reestablished, when you have to write a new playbook because of these unprecedented times, change then becomes fundamental. I would hate to think that the responses to grotesque police brutality and abuse of power and in custody murders is going to elicit this kind of response every single time. Because what I want you to do is look at the quantity of incidents that we have seen play out with someone's video camera, their cell phone camera, even going back to Rodney King. You can go back as far as you want. You can go back to the assassination of Martin Luther King. You can go back at any point in history, and we have been incredibly passive. But as time goes on, with Freddie Gray, we saw Baltimore burning. Eric Garner, we saw cities and their unrest. In the city of Milwaukee, here, 4 years ago, almost to the day, the killing of Seville Smith, which started fires. But what they didn't do when Seville Smith was killed in August 14th of 2016, they didn't burn the police station down. And that police station was a stone's throw away from where the protesters were in the city of Milwaukee. There is a George Floyd protest scheduled for today in Milwaukee, 27th and Center Street at 1 p.m. There is also a justice for Joel Acevedo, another man, Latino man that was killed at the home of a police officer on April 19th. There is a protest for his justice on 45th in Cleveland. They're going to start at 5 o'clock. I really would like to see these protests combined into one massive movement because Milwaukee has always been a powder keg. Now, the thing with Joel Acevedo, and there are a lot of members of his family that are members of the Forum Facebook group, and I'm very glad that they are, because they can give us firsthand information on what's actually going on without us having to go to other news sources that oftentimes get it wrong. There was no video in the murder of Joel Acevedo, so now we got to take a cop's word for it. People are tired of that. You guys remember Lorena Bobbitt? Of course you do. She was a victim of domestic violence at the hands of her husband. John Wayne Bobbitt, is that his name? I just remember Bobbitt and then that thing that happened to him and then that thing that he lost because of the thing that she did. I don't want to compare the situations, but at some point, people get to a breaking point, and you have to do something drastic because the people that don't want to change anything about this broken criminal justice system have a stake in wanting to make sure black and brown bodies and voices are diminished. And what they did in Minneapolis is they cut off the collective penis of the oppressive system that has told black and brown people who are fast gaining majority in this nation that you don't mean anything. The fires that you see burning, and I know you have a bunch of opinions on that, are a response to employment discrimination, our response to wage theft, our response to health disparities, our response to incarceration rates. That is how you have to respond. So you have to take all these different incidents and all the people that were killed and the Tamir Rices and the Dontre Hamiltons, and you roll all that up and you get fired. Let me also give some symbolism on the word nigger. While it may roll off the tongue and some of you believe that you can use it colloquially because your favorite rap singer uses the N-word, when an African American hears that word with the hard ER ending, it invokes a feeling in us that is rage, that is fire. Now, you can't really say the N-word like that anymore, especially white people, because if you're a white person that says the N-word and you have some kind of prominence, like you have a high, powerful job and you're director of some large corporation, you're probably going to get fired and They're going to make a big deal out of it. So you can't say the N word anymore because that totally outs you as a racist, like you're admitting it. But instead of saying the N word, you know what they do? They legislate the N word. They said, well, no, to vote, you need to have an ID because we know that a lot of you folks don't have an ID. Well, no, I know you want to send your children to the absolute best schools, but the tuition is a little bit more than you can afford because we know that black and brown bodies are disproportionately poor and underemployed. They legislate the word nigger. And this is a response to all of that. And you can go back to Iraq war protesters. You can go back to the 99% that were marching on Wall Street because we hate rich people. All of that collective repression has turned into fire. And the epicenter of all that is keeping that system in check are the police and the complacency of the good cops. We need good cops right now more than ever because there's still people that need police services. There's still emergencies that the police would routinely respond to with an understanding, caring, well trained officer who lives in that community. They've lifted their residency requirement for police officers in Minneapolis as well. And when they did that in the city of Milwaukee, we saw the difference. If due to white flight, because there were jobs in central cities and in urban cores that African Americans who were fleeing one form of oppression in the South to try and come north to where you didn't have Jim Crow laws to work, to start lives, to start families. And white people said, oh no, black people are coming, we need to move further and further away. And what you have now is an entire generation of white folks who grew up in the outskirts of urban centers in a white society and white culture and a politically conservative culture free from participation with diversity. And when those young people grow up and become adults, remember they grew up in the suburbs because their parents or their grandparents left urban centers and central cities because the Irish were here and the Germans were here and the Jewish were here. But then when African Americans came, they all fled and they created their own noose of suburbs around urban cores. And they're on the outside looking in at what these blacks are doing and look at their neighborhoods and they can't take care of their houses. Part of that is when whites left, they took their tax base with them. They took their businesses with them. They took employment opportunities with them, leaving everybody else to suffer. So much for building community. And I thought these states were supposed to be united. And then the next generation who grew up in outright segregation, segregation of ideas and of thoughts, segregating themselves from diversity. Now they want to grow up and be cops. And we're going to go, we're going to fix these central cities. Because ultimately, some of the people that moved out of the city are now seeing cities become redeveloped, downtowns or big office buildings and condominiums. And those folks that left a generation or two ago now see all the development as downtown. The suburbs suck. They're wrought with drugs, especially heroin. You can deny it if you want to, and so now they want to move back to the city, but the city isn't safe. So now we need these officers who grew up in the suburbs, in these segregated communities, to go back and fix what's wrong with those savages. And then you get police violence. But we understand that because to be black in this country means you don't have the option to turn a blind eye to history. To be white in this country means you can only look at the fun stuff. Only the things that bring you warm and fuzzy feelings of tradition, but if you are black, you have to know all of it because what history will do is tell black people what's coming next. Good morning, Teresa. Justin says the 36-hour rule states that any adult arrested under suspicion of a crime without a warrant can only be held in custody for 36 hours. Before seeing a judge, the rule applies to all misdemeanor, gross misdemeanor, and felony warrantless arrests in Minnesota. Probably something similar to, if not an interpretation of habeas corpus. Make an arrest so the people can rest. Yeah, here's the thing with that. I agree, make an arrest so the people can rest. So now the protests are spreading to other cities. Yes, some of it is about George Floyd. A lot of it is. But keep in mind, other cities have their issues with the police as well. There are issues with unfair treatment as well. And so you roll all these things together, and that is why you get these violent responses. With peaceful protests, just like, okay, you know how we were supposed to be still? We were supposed to stay at home and shelter in place until we can get everybody tested, and then we could find out who had the coronavirus, who was showing symptoms, who was asymptomatic, and then we were going to think of a remedy. When there's an incident of police brutality, and I'm using that as because it's the example that's on everybody's mind, the peaceful protest is people being still so we can figure out how to stop this from happening again. But when that doesn't happen, people just get fed up. The peaceful protest is an opportunity before things get destroyed for you all, the powers that be, those that still control and own everything, to figure something out. So in the meantime, we're going to be very good American citizens because for some godforsaken reason, we still believe in this system. So for a long time, we're just going to protest very peacefully. And Dr. King was like, no, we're going to protest peacefully. Toward the end of Dr. King's young life, he was starting to say, this peaceful stuff ain't working so good. Kimberly Strand Davis says arrests need to happen now. Maybe people should have listened to the kneeling. That was as peaceful as you can get. But the thing with Colin Kaepernick, and those of you that know me know I had my thoughts and feelings on him, which I'm not going to discuss now. Cap was right. I just didn't need my beloved football to be political fodder for Donald Trump because football was one of those things where you would get together with friends and strangers alike sometimes and you would just talk about the game. It was a vacation from all that troubles us. You can because people that have disparate backgrounds and otherwise don't have anything in common will wear the same jersey. And it was a moment of unity. And then Donald Trump took that away, and I was like, damn, Cap, could you have just. But Cap was right. Colin Kaepernick was correct. That was the most peaceful of all protests. And do you see what the backlash to white America was? Even the CEO of Papa John's said something about Colin Kaepernick. And then he had to step down. Was his name Papa John? No, his name wasn't. But even the CEO of Papa John's who said something about Colin Kaepernick peacefully protesting. But what is important is look how white people respond to that. And now I get it. Why some of our white friends and our white allies don't want to challenge their neighbors, the people in their social and professional circles. Because if someone is going to get up in arms and turn it overtly racial because an African American man is like, hey, I want you to pay attention to stuff that's happening before we burn down your police station. Oh, people had a fit. White people get so upset. And part of it is, it has to be fear. Because if you have even a benign understanding of history, no white person would want to trade places with anybody black. Because they know that the conditions that African Americans have endured continuously and have responded for the most part peacefully, no white person would want that to happen to them. And so when you see what is happening right now, when everything is in transition and everything is changing, and the response to police brutality, torture, and a public execution is very, very different, in an abstract way, what these folks are doing, and there's some agent provocateurs in this as well. I even know people from the city of Milwaukee that took their stupid asses to Minneapolis. Don't do that. Stay here at home. Minneapolis doesn't need you. That is a city that can take care of itself. It knows its politics. It knows its policy. Don't take your Milwaukee ass and then get tear gas and then put it on social media. Don't do that. Don't do that. We don't need that. When we were having our unrest here in the city of Milwaukee in August of 2016, we didn't want people from Gary, Indiana and Chicago bringing their asses up here, getting in our business. You can watch it on the news, but don't add to it, because when you come from other places and you descend on another city that is hurting, you're requiring more police. You're requiring more National Guard, because now it's not just the people that live there that have every right to do whatever they need to do by any means necessary to defend one of their own and call attention to the oppression that they're suffering with. Don't, I know you want to show support. I know you do. Send money. Send people some money that support a cause. Don't go. That makes me so mad when people do that. What these folk are doing is they're saying we're going to have we're going to elicit a response that you cannot ignore. Nothing gets attention like fire. Nothing is more symbolic than burning down a police station, which was surprisingly easy to overtake. You would think that a police station would be the most inoculated and protected, like a fortress. That's the last thing that the police would want because it makes them look weak. They burned down your house. That also shows that the police are no match for the public. I don't want anyone to think that police stations need to be the new targets, but somebody somewhere has already comprehended that because they're surprisingly easy to take. And Blue Lives Matter that'll get out there and protest when a black child gets killed and people are upset with the police. Blue Lives Matter didn't save the 3rd District Police Station. I'm going to take a break. I'm going to come back and talk about protests that are taking place nationwide, including an incident that happened in Denver that could be the foreshadowing of what's to come. You're listening to The Forum on Facebook Live. I'm your host, Sherwin Hughes, and I'll be right back. I hate that we still need to remind people or tell people that, there's a presidential election going on, and the other candidate, who is far from perfect, is the better choice. And I guess if I have to give more details than that, that's kind of a lost cause. I don't know if you have seen, I posted it in the Forum Facebook group. Join us, the Forum Talk Show on Facebook. And if you are commenting on this video from other places in which it has been shared, I can't see those, unfortunately. So join the group. The president said when the looting starts, the shooting starts. At this point, if you're still supporting Donald Trump, and there's 60 million people that are going to vote for him, 60 million people, and their sentiments aren't going to go away if Donald Trump is defeated in the Electoral College. Remember this, guys. Of all this going on, we have to have some kind of direction here. Good morning, Robert. Good morning, Tyler. Tyler says, can't believe we still have to deal with this in the middle of a pandemic. Shannon Lewandowski says, just fire. She just posted a fire emoji. Arande says, I've been saying that for the longest. How can you work for the city but not live there? Oh, I agree. Residency requirements are another oppressive blow to people who have maintained their steadfast commitment to an urban area. I live in the middle of the north side of the city of Milwaukee. Some of you would call this a bad neighborhood, but you call it a bad neighborhood because this is where the black people live. I call it home. If you think it's a bad neighborhood, stay away. When you say that the people who have committed themselves to a community that everyone else has abandoned and left, and then you say we're going to open up municipal job opportunities to anyone and make the people who maintain their commitment to a city and pay their property taxes to the city, and we buy things and we pay sales taxes, it comes out of the city. And when we work, we're paying employment taxes and income taxes in the city. You are now going to say, well, no, people that pay their property taxes from anywhere else in the state can come and take your municipal jobs. Like, we can't get anything, let alone justice. The 60 million people that are going to vote for Donald Trump are not going to go away. And at this point, if you are still with him, and some of you are, well, 60 million of you are, you're a Confederate. You want to call us a whole bunch of names? Well, we have one for you. And I use that term very seriously because it didn't end well for them. In fact, the places where the South has recovered, and some places in the South have not recovered economically and financially, look at the poverty. Look at the lack of industry. Look at the lack of unions to protect the workers that are in the South. There has always been an anti-union sentiment in the South, and that goes back to slavery, because you know you can't let your slaves, your workers, your labor force form a union. And even to this day, why do you think so many foreign automakers have plants in the South? Honda, Nissan, BMW, Mercedes, they all build cars in America in the South and pay the individuals who are building those fine luxury vehicles minimum wage because there's no unions. And if you look at the places in the South where the Confederacy lost, because the South actually believed that it could have an economic system based upon the buying and selling and trading of human beings, where rape was able to double your profit. They thought they would be able to get away with that. And when that was taken away from them, they still have not recovered. But the places in the South that have recovered are because those cities are mostly African American. Mostly, they're diverse now. So where you have recovery in the South, look at Atlanta. Atlanta's a success story. Atlanta was like a de facto capital of the Confederacy. Georgia almost got a black governor. If they didn't cheat, if Brian Kemp didn't cheat, you would have a black woman governor. Shannon says, we've been still too long. Tammy Reed said, you better say that with the drugs in the suburbs. Oh, I grew up in the suburbs. And when I grew up in the suburbs, my parents moved myself. I'm oldest. I got a younger brother. But there was a lot of de-industrialization going on in the city of Milwaukee, and that leads to all sorts of social changes as well. When the factories that brought African Americans here closed, and then there's nothing left to sustain that same level of income really anywhere. And then crack comes in. Crack was a way to inject hopelessness, despair, and addiction and the heavy hand of the criminal justice system to eradicate black life. It, I got to do a show on that at some point in time, because when people begin to make those connections on all the little, some of them have been microaggressions, some of them have been major aggressions against black people and black culture and our progress. But ultimately, what they're able to do with the media is just paint us as bad, irresponsible people. And so I grew up in the suburbs that at the time was not very diverse. The amount of drugs that I saw in my high school, like in school, at the lunchroom, the amount of kids that were getting caught with marijuana, smoking marijuana in the late 80s and the 1990s, and the police would catch them. Sometimes they get a ticket. Sometimes the kids would let's lose their marijuana to the cops, and we always had our conspiracy theories about that. Because if the cops pull you over and they take your weed and you don't get a ticket, them cops are smoking your weed. Because they're not going to report it, right? If they confiscated something from you and you don't get a ticket, then there's no record that they confiscated any weed, so they're going to smoke your weed. But when you grow up in a, I don't want to call it an integrated community, but when there's so few African Americans to where you can't parse us out and segregate us out, white privilege exists for everyone. So if I'm in a group of white friends, and my white friends have picked up a lot of cues from their parents, my white friends hated cops probably more than I did because they knew that they could talk to those cops any kind of way. And what white people, another bit of white privilege is, a lot of white folks can say, you know who my father is? You don't want to make this arrest, officer. Get your goddamn hands off me, you goddamn dirty pig. It's like, what? But some of those white kids also talk to their parents like that, so apple don't fall far from the tree. But I was able to see just a preponderance of drugs. And the thing about it was, when they got caught, they didn't even get in trouble. That is a disparity that I grew up seeing. That white kids could be kids. Listen, we take our BB guns to a park. Do you understand what happens now to a black kid if he takes his BB gun to the park? He's gonna get murdered. But you have to watch the pathology of all of this, because there was a period of time where black people and black communities and black progress was very much kept in check. Even after Jim Crow, because Jim Crow was designed to make sure that black people are not financially and economically competitive with white people. Even the federal government that supported housing segregation wanted white people in this country to have the opportunity to get home ownership and Social Security, because the domestic workers, who were majority black at the time, your maids, your butlers, etc., were exempt from Social Security. And that's Franklin Delano Roosevelt that did that. So those of you that call him some great liberal hero, terrible racist, terrible racist. And I hate to tell some white folks that the people that you've looked up to that are like these beacons of hope that were great liberals, terrible racists, terrible racist. Even Lyndon Johnson, who signed landmark civil rights legislation into law, called black people niggers every chance he got. What are we gonna do about these niggers? Remember, he was a white man from Texas, and Kennedy knew that he needed to pick a running mate from the South to try and neutralize the South, because the South wasn't trying to elect some Catholic East Coast elite wealthy liberal to the presidency, so they got old Lyndon Johnson. That was when white people used to have a stick. You guys know about the white folks that have a stick? And I learned this by growing up with the whites. That's their nigger beater. I'm not kidding you. Ask one. Such a lifetime of knee pain. Oh yeah, somebody been doing live videos there. They burned down the physical building. It was symbolic of us being victimized by the police. But the real barrier, structural and institutional racism still exists. It's really hard. Oh, Justin, you didn't hear the Jay-Z? You didn't play? We aren't hearing your bumper music or ads. Oh, really? Let me try and fix that. This is still a lot to try and do. Did you hear I played a Joe Biden commercial. I'm assuming you guys probably didn't hear that either. Right, I'll fix that. Oh, this is what I want to get to. From The Guardian. The U.S. has been rocked by a third night of protests over the death of George Floyd in police custody. Here's what we know so far. Protests against police brutality have continued in cities across America, including Minneapolis, Denver, New York, and Oakland, following the killing of George Floyd. Floyd, a 46-year-old black man, died in police custody after a white officer handcuffed him and kneeled on his neck for several minutes as Floyd pleaded that he could not breathe. In Minneapolis, police abandoned the 3rd Precinct police station, which has been a major police site. Crowds breached the station, set the entrance on fire. Elsewhere, businesses were looted and blazes set as the evening wore on. There were unconfirmed reports that gas lines to the 3rd Precinct building had been cut. In St. Paul, the police department reported 170 businesses have been damaged. St. Paul has had more police involved violence than Minneapolis, and it's a smaller city. But then there is what happened in Denver. Now, some of this stuff is unconfirmed. And also, as I was watching MSNBC last night, you couldn't tell if it was fireworks or if it was gunshots. I think there's some intent to that because even around the 4th of July, you can't tell, was that a firecracker or was that the bust of a 45? And so that's, some of these folks who are out there, whether they're agent provocateurs or not, are very smart. You know, you can use a laser pointer to thwart facial recognition software. That actually happens. So some of these folks are very smart. So in Denver, let's go to the story from the Patch. Denver, Colorado, despite calls for peaceful protests, tensions escalated Thursday night in Denver, where several hundred people gathered to protest the death of George Floyd. According to multiple reports, protesters marched through downtown Denver, snarling traffic. Aerial footage showed protesters briefly blocking traffic from moving on Interstate 25 in both directions before swarming back through the downtown streets outside the Capitol. Police fired tear gas to get them to move off the interstate, the Denver Post reported. Aerial footage and reports from the scene showed several protesters smashing the windows out of at least 2 parked vehicles outside the Capitol and others spray painting graffiti on the Capitol steps. At least one person was reportedly taken to the hospital. Here we go. Earlier in the evening, so this is yesterday, Denver police confirmed, and so in all of these other cases where we thought maybe that was the burst of a 223 round or a 9mm round, in Denver, they confirmed shots were fired at West Colfax Avenue and West 15th Street near the Capitol. No injuries were reported. This essentially is a civil war. Now, for the last hour and some change, I have not been glued to the news. The National Guard has been deployed, and so I went to the National Guard's Twitter page, and they announced that they deployed 500. They're activated. I don't know if they've been deployed to where they have descended on St. Paul, and St. Paul is where they're going first. When you tell the people that are protesting and firebugs that you're activating 500 National Guard, now the protesters know the number that they have to outpace. And of the 500, some of them are going to be support staff. So when you activate the National Guard, they're not, some of them are going to be in Humvees wearing camouflage. The imagery of that is not going to go over well with the protesters, I assure you, because they already got a victory. They already captured Fort Donaldson, if you're going to do a Civil War reference. So now the protesters are emboldened. And now the National Guard that's saying they're activating 500 members, who are, let's keep in mind, they're members of the community. I'm getting all sorts of inboxes on. Do you know there was somebody that, so we post a lot of things in the Facebook group. Somebody posted yesterday morning on whatever article was the breaking news at the time. There's breaking news every 90 seconds. There was somebody said, a woman whose name I'm not going to say, said there's something big planned in Minneapolis tonight, meaning last night. She said her son lives in Minneapolis, and her son is just a recent college graduate, and her son said that there's something big planned in Minneapolis. They were planning on burning that police station down. And they did. That takes the cake. And the symbolism of it, but also shows that the police are weak in protecting their own property. The police are here to protect life and property, but couldn't protect their own. That's got to send shockwaves. Law enforcement all over the country has to now know that their dwellings, their fortresses, their sanctuaries, no match for the public. No match for the public. That has to be a scary thought. Diane Blaylock said, Blaylock, I said that wrong. What you going to do? Where are you? Don't worry about somebody else. Where are you with this people are angry, upset from the treatment Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. There's more, but I can't proofread your comments, guys, so if your grammar is bad, I'm just going to read it. We have died and fought in every war and still have to fight for our right to be Americans. What these people are doing, you don't want to call them patriots. If they were white colonists fighting the English, then they'd be patriots. They're patriots too because they're fighting for a future white minority that very well could get oppressed when police forces and police unions are majority black and brown. Do you know what happens to this nation if the young people who are disaffected by all of this, who don't want their adult lives and their sunset years to be wrought with disparate treatment and a lack of justice, if some of them become police officers, they may hate white people for the rest of their lives. And don't think that this nation is not becoming majority minority. It is. We're not at the point yet where what I'm going to call protected classes control corporations and control political policy and contribute huge amounts of money to maintaining their system. But you never know what could happen in this country, especially as we are literally redefining everything. We have to get something established to where there is an appearance of fairness, regardless of who you are, because white people are going to be the minority in this country. And when that happens, you don't want angry African Americans or Latinos or angry gays or whoever else has been oppressed in these moments to do to your children what is happening to black people right now. White America is making their future really unsafe unless a whole paradigm shift takes place. Black and brown people are not going to be in the minority forever. Black and brown people are not going to be. It's not going to be forever. If a woman is pregnant right now and has young white children, and an African American woman, an Asian woman, and a Latina woman who are having more children, by the way. People of color are having more children per person. They are. And so as time goes on, the numbers of people of color are just going to explode. And when they have more children, then their children could potentially have more children. You see where I'm getting at? And so if one cohort of people in this nation believe that they have a heavy hand of power over others, then this could be the fate of the white children that you are so vehemently trying to protect. Now, let me be clear. Nobody wants that. We don't want that. Listen, if George Zimmerman is still alive, then clearly vigilanteism, we would much rather be vigilantes against an entire system. Bernie Sanders tried with healthcare, but we have like immediate needs. And healthcare, I understand, is an immediate need, but he was on to something, but Bernie Sanders was just too white and too old and too Vermont. And I think the Vermont part of Bernie Sanders kind of overshadowed the old and the white. Just Vermont is just, you can be a liberal, progressive, democratic socialist, but also vote for the NRA. It's like Bernie was just, he was on to something. But it's better that other people take on that fight that Bernie Sanders was trying to start. Well, he had been in that fight for 40 years. But you have younger members of Congress, especially the class that was elected in 2018, that took bits and pieces of a Bernie Sanders style agenda and they ran with it in their respective congressional districts. And now you have a totally different Congress. Unfortunately, Congress is kind of neutered because Donald Trump does not listen to the rule of law and there are no consequences. Tammy Reed, you do need that show regarding crack in the inner city. Yeah, I probably should. It's an interesting history. I grew up in Madison, so I know. Oh, Madison is just Madison, Wisconsin, the capital of the state of Wisconsin, this beacon of liberalism. And during the Vietnam War, lots of protests. in Madison, and there's still some hippies that are floating around on the streets of Madison, recalling the summer of 1968. But Madison, with all of their liberalness, terribly racist. Racist and elite. If you go outside of the city of Madison, so away from the immediate view of the beautiful state capital, like Middleton and Fitchburg, black people are not safe out there. But Madison is supposed to be so liberal. No, Madison votes for Democrats, but that doesn't mean that they like black people. Tamir Rice says Tammy Reed. Nick Harris posted President Obama's something open letter to America's law enforcement community. No match for the public and the collective outrage. When people say all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter, it's a racial dig to me. That burns me up. The people who say that, their lives always matter. Correct, Nick Harris. If if a woman has breast cancer, and I don't want any women to get breast cancer, and please, guys, because of the pandemic, don't forego your regular medical examinations. Don't do that. Just please go to the doctor, because I don't want someone to be suffering from cancer in the early stages of it, but they don't want to go to the doctor because they're afraid that they're going to get coronavirus. You still need to go, because we don't need more casualties of individuals who are not getting routine medical care. Oh, I got to get a colonoscopy at some point, so let me take my own advice. Facts says Tammy Reed. Eileen Seeger says blended is best. Rodney is replying to Nick Harris. A CNN reported he was arrested and released. Yeah, the governor had to get involved in that one. I was in Fitchburg too. My mom went to Middleton. Also, you got roots in Madison, LA, Thomas. But no, there's some dramatic differences, and we have to make it very, very clear, because somebody votes for a Democrat does not mean that they like black people or will want to live next to black people. The problem with Madison is it's almost like an institution in the state of Wisconsin that all liberal policies come from the brain trusts that are there, but Madison lacks diversity. And whenever you lack diversity, you're diminishing voices as if they don't matter. Just because black people are 6 or 7% of the entire population of the state of Wisconsin, we are close to 50% of the city of Milwaukee. And the city of Milwaukee, there's a lot of power here in the city and the county of Milwaukee, because we're the economic engine for the entire state. And so some of the more conservative voting counties in outstate Wisconsin rely on the money that is made and taxed in Milwaukee to fund their whole school system. So if Milwaukee's not doing well economically and financially, or if we're spending a disproportionate amount of our state resources on incarcerating black people for, I don't know, being black, then those other communities are going to suffer, but they found a way to counteract that. Did you guys know that prisons, that at least in Wisconsin, I don't know where you're from, if they do it differently, prisons, minimum security, maximum security, are usually built in smaller towns and smaller communities. They used to be farming communities, but corporate farming has taken a lot of that away from them. We talk about 150-year-old farms when white people used to get free land and all sorts of other stuff. So when the corporate farms moved in and really screwed those people over, well, they had to have some kind of economic development, but long-term sustainable economic development, because you can't build, big hotels and resorts in these really small farming towns. So they built prisons. And here's the kicker, and I wish more people knew this. So if you take a survey of the state of Wisconsin, if you look at where the prisons are, and there was a 17-year-old kid, this had to have been 5 or 6 years ago, that did his own, one of those dot census maps. So each dot represented an African American. I think what he was trying to do was figure out where the African American neighborhoods are in the state of Wisconsin, other than Milwaukee, or all of the African American neighborhoods, are they just in the city of Milwaukee? And what we found is that there were 33 of the 54 black neighborhoods scattered about the states. And then when they did further analysis, they found that the other black neighborhoods outside of the city of Milwaukee were all prisons. Do you know that those small towns get to count their inmate population in the census? You know, the census means $1,000 roughly per person for transportation funds, for public education, and for healthcare resources. So these small towns that were gutted when corporate farming came in and took over now have prisons and can get economic stability, not just from the prison itself, because prisons have wardens and have guards and have doctors and nurses and pharmacists and maintenance staff and all sorts of people that keep that building running. So that's economic development for those people. But they also get resources from the federal government due to the census. If you don't fill your census form out, because the inmates, they're going to get counted, all of them. Justin says, I lived in Madison for a year. That was enough. So many well-meaning white people. I can't tell you how many forums I went to regarding, quote, the achievement gap when I lived there and heard a whole bunch of grand liberal plans. Those same people would talk about the, quote, bad neighborhoods in Madison and would never actually go there. It's almost like let them eat cake. But the people are starving. Well, if they want cake, let them eat cake. Let the blacks have good schools. What's stopping the blacks from having good schools? It must be the blacks. We're gonna have great schools forever. We're gonna have the best schools. We're gonna have the. Does that sound familiar? We're gonna have the schools are gonna be. The schools are gonna get tired of winning. They're gonna be such good schools. Good schools for everyone. Do you remember when Trump was throwing the rolls of paper towels into the crowd in Puerto Rico? Let that burn in your memory. Well, guys, let's stay vigilant. There are two protests that are scheduled for the city of Milwaukee. One, a George Floyd protest at 1 p.m. and is set to begin on 27th and Center, a very busy intersection in the city of Milwaukee. And I have a feeling that that entire intersection is going to be shut down. So if you're in the vicinity, just be made aware. And there's also another protest of an officer involved death, the death of Joel Acevedo, which took place on April 19th. There is no video footage of that horrific incident, but his family and Joel Acevedo deserve justice as well. That protest is set to start at 5 p.m. in the area of 45th and Cleveland on Milwaukee's south side. Hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Please stay safe, be careful, and wear a mask if you're out in public.